Hey everyone, my name is Molly Struve, and I want to welcome you to Calling Out a Terrible On-Call System. Currently, I'm a site reliability engineer for Netflix, but the story I'm going to share with you all today is actually from my time at a previous company. Now, being a site reliability engineer means I'm one of those weird people that thrives on being on call. The adrenaline rush of having to figure out a bug as quick as possible really gets me going. But I'm pretty sure most engineers are not like myself. So, by a show of hands, how many of you hate being on call? Okay, yes, a lot of folks. Many people dread being on call, but unfortunately, it's a necessity to support the applications that we build. But it should not, I repeat, it should not make people miserable. If folks are miserable while they are on call, then you have a problem. I'm here today to give you some suggestions and strategies that you can use to help you solve this common problem. Now, all of these strategies I'm about to share, unfortunately, didn't just hit me overnight. To figure all this out, I had to live through one of those terrible on-call systems. And during that experience, it showed me firsthand the toll a terrible system can take on all of those involved. So here's the story of a terrible on-call system in the making. In the beginning, I was working at a startup company on a small engineering team, and we each participated in a single on-call rotation. Everyone was on the rotation, and we'd each go on call for 1 week at a time. Now, the team had 5 developers on it, and it worked great. Everyone was very experienced with the application and with being on call because we all did it relatively often. However, as the years went by, the team started to grow. But despite that team growth, we still stuck with this single on-call rotation. And eventually, the team got so big that folks were going on call once every 3 to 4 months. Now, being on call once every few months may seem like a dream come true, but in reality, it's far from it. This giant single rotation was making developers miserable for a variety of reasons. For starters, this single rotation meant infrequent on-call shifts. As I mentioned, developers were going on call once every few months. And because on-call shifts were so infrequent, they were not able to get the experience that they needed to know how to handle issues effectively. In addition, our code base had grown tremendously and was vastly more complex than when we had started. There were so many things being developed at once that when a problem arose, there was a good chance that the person who was on call knew nothing about the code that was causing it. And what happens when an alarm goes off and you have no idea what to do? You panic. And who can blame you? We've all been there. It's terrifying when you have to fix something that you know nothing about. When developers would panic, they would turn to the people that they knew could likely fix the problem the fastest. And that was the site reliability engineering team. Of course, the developers were right in their assumption. Usually, the site reliability team could fix the problem the fastest. But our site reliability engineering team at the time only had 3 people on it. And relying on a small set of people for everything doesn't scale. Constantly having to jump in and help with on-call issues quickly began to burn out the site reliability team's time. Essentially, the SRE team began to act as if it was on call 24/7. The constant bombardment of questions and requests began to burn out the site reliability team. Besides having a burned out and inefficiently used site reliability team, another problem with this giant single rotation was that developers felt like they had no sense of ownership over the code they were responsible for when they were on call. One person would write the code, and another person would be the one debugging it when it broke. The app was so big that there was just so much of it, no one felt like they had really any ownership over any certain piece of it. This giant, seemingly innocuous on-call rotation might seem harmless enough at first. But what this leads to is infrequent on-call shifts, which means less on-call experience for developers and less practice. Lack of experience leads to panicked developers who have no clue how to handle issues when they arise. And when those panicked developers need help, that leads to a burned-out site reliability team. No one in this entire on-call rotation situation was happy. And to top it all off, there was no feeling of ownership for anyone. All of these problems quickly began adding up. And eventually, it got so bad that we knew something had to change. Now, before I tell you all about the solution that we landed on, I first want to briefly cover how the engineering team at the time was organized, so you have some context about how we ended up on the solution that we did. In the engineering department, at the time, there were 3 separate developer teams. Each team had 5 to 7 developers on it, plus a manager. Each team had its own set of projects and goals, but each of these teams worked across one single monolithic application. Unlike other apps, which might have very separate back-end components owned by individual teams, there were no clear or obvious lines of ownership within this single monolithic application. This would prove to be one of the biggest hurdles when it came to fixing this terrible on-call system. OK, now that you have a little background on the team organization, let's get to the good stuff. The solution to fixing this terrible on-call system. First and foremost, we knew we had to break up this giant single rotation if we wanted to continue growing. Despite all of these developers working across one monolithic application, we decided to break the single rotation into 3. 1 rotation for each of the 3 developer teams. Having 3 smaller rotations led to more frequent on-call shifts, which meant more practice and experience for developers being on call. As backwards as it may sound, being on call on a regular cadence is a benefit because developers become more comfortable and can really figure out what works for them when they're on call. So, first strategy that we implemented when overhauling our on-call system was to split our giant rotation into 3 smaller rotations. Now, this solved the problem of shift frequency, but that still left the biggest problem of all: application ownership. Who supports what? How do you decide what team is going to own what code when they're on call? Because, let's be honest, when it all boils down to it, no one wants to support something they don't feel like they own. And we've all heard this before. Not my problem. To accomplish this, we chose to split up the on-call application ownership amongst the 3 developer teams. Even though I'm about to breeze through this split, I want to be clear. This did not happen overnight. During this process, there was a lot of meetings and planning and collaborating between the site reliability team and the developer teams to figure out the best and most logical way to split up the components of our single application. I really want to highlight, this was not the site reliability engineering team just calling the shots and handing over assignments to the developer teams. We wanted this whole process to be as collaborative as possible because we knew that was going to give us our best chance of succeeding. These application components may be specific to this situation, but I want to call them out here in hopes that maybe it might spark some ideas for some of you that might be in a similar situation with one big monolithic application. So we first started by splitting up our background workers. The application we had did a lot of async processing, so we figured those would be a good candidate to split up. We gave the data processing workers to Team 1. Team 2 got the overnight reporting workers, and Team 3 got our user communication workers. The next thing we needed to split up were our service alerts. What do I mean by service alerts? Service alerts here are the alerts that we had set up to monitor things like the database and other parts of our system. Before, it was one person keeping an eye on all of these. And so we decided that we wanted to split those up between the 3 developer teams. So team 1 got the Redis and worker queue alerts. Team 2, the Elasticsearch and API alerts. And team 3, the MySQL and page load alerts. With the service alerts split up, as well as the workers, the last thing we needed to split up was our application components and code. We were running a single monolithic Rails application at the time. So this involves splitting up things like models and controllers. We started by giving all the data processing code to team 1. We figured this paired well with the workers they were responsible for. We gave team 2 the emailing and reporting code. Once again, we felt that paired well with their overnight reporting workers. And finally, we gave team 3 the user and in-app alerting code, which paired well with their user communication workers. Once the lines had been drawn, we stressed to each of the developer teams that we might still need to move things around to balance the code and responsibilities equally. This showed to the developers that we were fully invested in making sure that this new rotation was fair and better for everyone. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to get a little specific here about how we split this all up. So if you all find yourselves in a similar situation, it might give you some ideas for how you might go about splitting up a single monolithic application. And with that, splitting up application ownership slides into the number 2 spot in our overhauling on-call list. Now, when it comes to instilling that feeling of ownership, another big obstacle is constantly changing code. Having 15 developers or more is great. You can crank out a ton of features and a ton of code. But then the question becomes, how did teams stay on top of the code they were responsible for when they were on call, and that code was constantly changing? For this, we took advantage of GitLab's CODEOWNERS file. The CODEOWNERS file lives in the .github directory of your application. This file allows you to specify who or what teams own a file within your directory. So here's an example of a CODEOWNERS file. As you can see, you can assign types of files to a team or a person. Maybe you have a front-end team, you want to assign them all the CSS and JavaScript files. You can assign entire directories to a team or a person. Or you can assign a single file to a team or a person. Once you have this file in place, when any file in your app directory is updated, in a pull request, the owner of that file is automatically tagged for review. This allowed the 3 teams to work across the entire code base while also staying on top of what was changing in the components that they were responsible for when they were on call. Using a CODEOWNERS file slides into the 3rd spot in our overhauling on-call strategy list. So with application components split up and the CODEOWNERS file to support and empower that feeling of ownership, next on our list was to make sure that every team and every single person on every team was completely comfortable with the application components they owned. To do this, the SRE team hosted mini on-call training sessions. During these sessions, we sat down with each of the 3 developer teams, and we reviewed the code, the workers, and the alerts they were responsible for when they were on call. During these on-call training sessions, we covered things like common issues that might pop up. For example, when alert A goes off, that usually means XYZ is broken. We took time to dive into all the code functionality. We made sure that every person on every team knew exactly what each piece of code they were responsible for did. And last but not least, we made sure that each team understood how their components affected and impacted the rest of the application. For example, if Redis went down, how does that affect other teams' components? How is the application going to react to that type of scenario? These on-call training sessions gave developers a lot more confidence in their ability to handle situations because they now had a clear picture of what they were responsible for when on call and how to handle it. Even though they hadn't built some of the code themselves, they had an understanding for how it all worked. Hosting on-call training sessions takes the 4th spot in our Overhauling On-Call list. As I mentioned earlier, the purpose of these was not only to educate developers, but to give them that confidence so that they felt secure when they were on call. Another confidence booster for developers who were on call was having on-call support. What do I mean by this? When a person is paged, they're not necessarily going to have all the answers. Sometimes they might need help to figure out the problem. Originally, the site reliability team acted as support for the on-call developer. If the on-call developer had questions or needed help with anything, they would talk to the site reliability team member who was on call that week. The problem with this approach was that, as I mentioned earlier, our site reliability team only had 3 people on it. And when you rely on 3 people to support 15 plus, it's not going to end well. Our site reliability team got burned out pretty quickly, being the constant support system for the on-call developers. With the new system, each developer who is on call acts as the support for the others. If any developer finds themselves overwhelmed, stuck on an issue, or just needs any sort of help, they now have 2 people they can reach out to. Having a support system like this is crucial for crafting an on-call system that is comfortable for everyone. No one wants to feel alone when they are on call. So ensuring that the on-call developer has a solid support system is crucial. The last improvement we made to our system was welcomed by everyone. And that was, we focused the responsibility for the on-call developers. With the old system, the lone on-call developer was responsible for technically debugging and fixing the problem, which I think we can all agree is a pretty big task in itself. In addition, they were responsible for setting a status page if needed. And lastly, it was also their job to communicate the problem internally to the rest of the team. OK, this can work great if you're a tiny team and everybody is sitting in one single room. And so basically, you just know what's going on all the time. But as your company grows and you start getting other offices and you start going off and working in different places, this doesn't work. Needless to say, the responsibilities of the on-call dev was way overloaded at this point. With the new system, the only responsibility an on-call developer had was to technically debug and fix the problem. Narrowing the scope was crucial to improving the on-call experience because it let developers focus on what they do best, fixing the problem at hand. The responsibility of setting the status page got moved to the support team. This made sense because the customer support team was the closest to the customer, so they were the best equipped to communicate with them during an incident. And the responsibility of internal communication got moved to the on-call developers team's manager. So if an incident arose, the on-call developer's manager would be the one responsible for communicating that to everyone internally within the technical organization. Narrowing the scope of the on-call responsibilities was the last piece of the puzzle when it came to overhauling this terrible on-call system. Now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, OK, that sounds great, but what does this on-call system get me? How can my team benefit from implementing some of these strategies? I've touched lightly on some of the benefits, but now I want to really dive into them and talk about the payoff of overhauling this terrible on-call system. The first big payoff, improved alerting. Originally, the site reliability team had set up all the alerting tools. However, once we split up the alerts and handed them over to the 3 developer teams, they took them and ran. Because each team felt a renewed sense of ownership over their alerts, they started to improve on them and build on them. Not only did they make more alerts, but they improved on the existing ones. The improved alerts, in turn, led to happier on-call developers because there was less false positives, and they had alerts tuned so well that they would alert on problems before they became major issues. Improved alerting wasn't the only payoff that we saw when overhauling this on-call system. As I briefly mentioned earlier, there was a renewed sense of ownership among all of the developers. Even though one team would edit code that another team supported, there was still that keen sense of ownership for the supporting team. The supporting team kind of acted as the domain experts over the code that they were responsible for when they were on call. The key strategy for ensuring that sense of ownership was using that code owners file. The code owners file ensured that the supporting team was always aware and could sign off on any changes. In addition, splitting up the code between the 3 teams meant that each team actually had a manageable chunk of code they could learn and support. Unlike before, where every developer was responsible for the entire code base, which was way too much for any single person to have in their head. Shrinking down the code that each developer was responsible for, along with keeping them updated on any changes to that code, gave developers that sense of ownership again. And that sense of ownership made them excited to support their on-call code. Another benefit of this new system was faster incident response. Any SRE knows that's like the holy grail there. Incident response improved for a few different reasons. For one, with 3 developers on call at once, and each one of them focusing on a smaller piece of the application, they could identify problems faster. As I also mentioned, each team took time to improve their alerts so that alerts would notify them sooner of problems before they turned into major issues. This not only decreased incident response time, but it actually helped prevent some incidents altogether. In addition to identifying problems sooner, debugging and figuring out what had triggered a problem became quicker because teams were intimately familiar with their code and their alerts. When a problem arose, the team that owned that code could debug it much more efficiently than before. Faster incident response is always the goal of any SRE team. And to be able to get it from an on-call system is pretty huge. Another payoff of this new system was that the on-call person was never alone. Having 3 developers on call at once meant that none of the developers was ever alone and always had someone that they could turn to for help and support if they needed it. If an alarm went off in one section of the application, that developer knew there were 2 others there to help them if they needed it. Being on call can be stressful, but knowing that there is always someone there easily accessible to help can do wonders for a developer's confidence. Ensuring that no one is ever alone may seem like a small positive. But I want to add this. This was the most requested attribute from the developers for a new on-call system. So before starting this whole process, I sat down and I talked to our developers and said, hey, what do you want out of this new system? At the very top of all of their lists was having help and support while on call. Don't underestimate how much a multiple developer on-call experience can improve the on-call experience for your developers. Developers never being alone while on-call takes the fourth spot in our list of benefits. The last benefit that we discovered with this new system was better cross-team communication. As I stated before, each of the 3 developer teams worked across this one single monolithic application. This meant teams were often changing code that another team was responsible for when they were on call. Having that code owners file in place ensured that the on-call team was alerted to those changes. This not only allowed for good technical review, but it kept each of the teams up to date on what the other teams were working on. And with that, the list of payoffs of overhauling this terrible on-call system is complete. At the top, improved alerting. Any small SRE team knows that any help you can get improving your alerts benefits everyone. Developers got a renewed sense of ownership, making them more enthusiastic to actually be on call. Incident response time got faster thanks to the improved alerting and the in-depth knowledge of each team over their on-call components. On-call developers were never alone, giving them peace of mind and confidence. And finally, cross-team communication improved, which benefited the entire technical organization. I think we can agree that these benefits would benefit all of our teams. And to get them from an on-call system is pretty awesome. So if these are the benefits your team is looking for, and developers are struggling within your on-call system, consider overhauling it with the help of these 6 strategies. Smaller rotations to increase shift frequency. Split up application ownership so developers can once again feel like they own what they're supporting. Use a code owners file or something similar to further instill that sense of ownership. Host on-call training sessions so that your teams and the developers that are on call know the code that they're responsible for. Finally, always have a support system and make sure the responsibilities for the on-call developer are narrow and focus on what they do best, technically fixing the problem. On-call is something that many people in this industry dread. And I firmly believe it should not be that way. If people are dreading on-call, then something is broken within your system. Sure, everyone at some point is going to get that late night or weekend page that is a pain. But if that pain is the norm, then there's something there that you have to fix. I hope that this talk has given you some ideas to help you improve your own on-call system so that you can help your developers thrive. Thank you.